The Lives of the Saints by the Reverend Alban Butler, taken from the 4th edition, published in 1954. January 10th. St. William, Confessor, Archbishop of Berges. William Berroyer, of the illustrious family of the ancient Counts of Nevers, was educated by Peter the Hermit, Archdeacon of Soissons, his uncle by his mother's side. He learned from his infancy to despise the folly and emptiness of the riches and grandeur of the world, to abhor its pleasures, and to tremble at its dangers. His only delight was in exercises of piety and in his studies, in which he employed his whole time with indefatigable application. He was made canon, first of Soissons and afterwards of Paris, but he soon took the resolution of abandoning all commerce with the world, and retired into the solitude of Grandmont, where he lived with great regularity in that austere order, till, seeing its peace disturbed by a contest which arose between the fathers and lay brothers, he passed into the Cistercian, then in wonderful odor of sanctity. He took the habit in the Abbey of Pontigny, and shining as a perfect model of monastic perfection, was after some time chosen prior of that house, and afterwards abbot, first of Fontaine-Jean in the diocese of Sens, and some time after of Chailly near Senlis, a much more numerous monastery, also a filiation of Pontigny, built by Louis the Fat in 1136, a little before his death. St. William always reputed himself the last among his brethren. The universal mortification of his senses and passions laid in him the foundation of an admirable purity of heart and an extraordinary gift of prayer, in which he received great heavenly lights and tasted of the sweets which God had reserved for those to whom he is pleased to communicate himself. The sweetness and cheerfulness of his countenance testified the uninterrupted joy and peace that overflowed his soul, and made virtue appear with the most engaging charms in the midst of austerities. On the death of Henry de Sully, Archbishop of Berges, the clergy of that church requested his help, Udo, Bishop of Paris, to come and assist them in the election of a pastor. Desirous to choose some abbot of the Cistercian order, then renowned for holy men, they put on the altar the names of 3, written on as many billets. This manner of election by lots would have been superstitious and a tempting of God, had it been done relying on a miracle, without the warrant of divine inspiration. But it deserved not the censure, when all the persons proposed seemed equally worthy and fit, as the choice was only recommended to God, and left to this issue by following the rules of his ordinary providence, and imploring his light without rashness, or a neglect of the usual means of scrutiny. Prudence might sometimes even recommend such a method, in order to terminate a debate when the candidates seem equally qualified. God, in such cases, is said sometimes to have miraculously interposed. Udo, accordingly, having written 3 billets, laid them on the altar, and having made his prayer, drew first the name of the abbot William, on whom, at the same time, the majority of the votes of the clergy had made the election fall, the 23rd of November, 1200. This news overwhelmed William with grief. He never would have acquiesced had he not received a double command in virtue of obedience from the Pope, and from his general, the abbot of Citeaux. He left his dear solitude with many tears, and was received at Berges as one sent by heaven, and soon after was consecrated. In this new dignity, his first care was to conform both his exterior and interior to the most perfect virtues of sanctity, being very sensible that a man's first task is to honor God perfectly in his own soul. He redoubled all his austerities, saying it was now incumbent on him to do penance for others as well as for himself. He always wore a hair shirt under his religious habit, and never added nor diminished anything in his clothes, either winter or summer. He never ate any flesh meat, though he had it at his table for strangers. His attention to feed his flock was no less remarkable, especially in assisting the poor both spiritually and corporally, saying that he was chiefly sent for them. He was most mild to penitent sinners, but inflexible towards the impenitent, though he refused to have recourse to the civil power against them, the usual remedy of that age. Many such he at last reclaimed by his sweetness and charity. Certain great men, abusing his lenity, usurped the rights of his church, but the saint strenuously defended them even against the king himself, notwithstanding his threats to confiscate his lands. By humility and resolution he overcame several contradictions of his chapter and other clergy. By his zeal he converted many of the Albigenses, contemporary heretics, and was preparing himself for a mission among them at the time he was seized with his last illness. He would, notwithstanding, preach a farewell sermon to his people, which increased his fever to such a degree that he was obliged to set aside his journey and take to his bed. Drawing near his end, he received first extreme unction, according to the discipline of that age, Then, in order to receive the viaticum, he rose out of bed, fell on his knees, melting in tears, and prayed long prostrate with his arms stretched out in the form of a cross. The night following, perceiving his last hour approach, he desired to anticipate the nocturnes, which are said at midnight. But having made the sign of the cross on his lips and breast, was able to pronounce no more than the 2 first words. Then, according to a sign made by him, he was laid on ashes in the haircloth, which he always privately wore. In this posture he soon after expired, a little past midnight, on the morning of the 10th of January in 1209. His body was interred in his cathedral, and being honored by many miracles, was taken up in 1217, and in the year following he was canonized by Pope Honorius III. His relics were kept with great veneration till 1562, when they were burnt and scattered in the winds by the Huguenots, on occasion of their plundering the Cathedral of Berges, as Baillet and Ballandus mention. A bone of his arm is shown with veneration at Chailly, whither it had been sent soon after the saint's body was taken up. And a rib is preserved in the church of the College of Navarre at Paris, on which the canons of St. Berges bestowed it in 1399. His festival is kept in that church with great solemnity, and a great concourse of devout persons. St. William being regarded in several parts of France as one of the patrons of the nation, though his name is not mentioned in the Roman martyrology. The celebrated Countess Maud, his niece, out of veneration for his memory, bestowed certain lands in the Nervaux on the church of Berges. Philip Berroyer, a nephew of St. William, was Archbishop of Berges from the year 1236 to 1260, in which he died in the odor of sanctity. Nangy ascribes to him many miracles, and other historians bear testimony to his eminent virtue. Dammartin has published his edifying original life. If we look into the lives of all the saints, we shall find that it was by a spirit and gift of prayer that the Holy Ghost formed in their hearts the most perfect sentiments of all virtues. It is this which enlightens the understanding and infuses a spiritual knowledge and a heavenly wisdom, which is incomparably more excellent than that in which philosophers pride themselves. The same purifies the affections, sanctifies the soul, adorns it with virtues, and enriches it with every gift of heaven. Holy pastors have always made retirement in a life of prayer their apprenticeship or preparation for the ministry, and afterwards, amidst its functions, were still men of prayer in them, having God always present to their mind, and setting apart intervals in the day and a considerable part of the nights to apply themselves with their whole attention to this exercise in the silence of all creatures.